Hi everyone. I just wanted to create a quick video introducing Unity, which is the main development software we'll be using to create the VR applications for this class, and talk a little bit about using VR in Unity. This is a very brief introduction. You'll have to get more details from the tutorials that we linked in the weekly schedule, but hopefully this will be a good starting off point, especially for those students who have not used Unity much before. So getting started with the intro to Unity, of course the first thing that you'll need to do is download and install it. So Unity Editor is the main development environment for Unity, and that's the place where you can kind of drag and drop different things and move things around in your virtual environment. So you can go here to download the latest version. When you're going through the installment process, don't just click through continue for all of the windows. Make sure you're actually reading through, because there is a little bit of customization that you need to pay attention to, which I'll go over in the next slide. And then once you have this all installed, the Unity Editor is of course where you'll be doing most of your development, but there's also an accompanying script editor called MonoDevelop. And this is where you can go in and edit the scripts that are attached to different game objects and things like that. You have your choice of coding languages. You can either do it in C# or JavaScript. And for those students who may not be or may not have as much experience programming, don't be intimidated by this. A lot of Unity development can be done in the Unity Editor, which is very visual and drag and drop. But making a few little changes may be necessary for your various projects. So just know that when you double click on a script in Unity, the default is to open up MonoDevelop, where you can go in and edit these scripts. And this may not be as relevant for this class. I'm using a presentation from a more general source, but some browsers or Unity has a plugin that you can install called the Unity Web Player, where you can run Unity programs on web browsers. But since we're developing for VR, which will either end up being on your phone or on your desktop, this probably isn't as relevant for this class. So this is the setup window that I was talking about. And this is the screen where you'll kind of have to go through and make sure you're actually installing what you need to install. It's for a little older version of Unity, but the same sort of process is still used. So the first one is the Unity version that we're installing. Definitely make sure you check that. You can install the documentation you want. Make sure to install the standard assets. These are the kind of built-in things that you can use in Unity, so make sure you install that. You can install the sample project if you want. If you're on Windows, you can use Visual Studio instead of the MonoDevelop script editor that I was talking about earlier. But the main thing that you want to focus on is you want to make sure that you have the correct build support options checked. So these actually determine what operating system you can develop for in Unity. And if you don't check the right ones now, you basically have to uninstall and reinstall Unity to get the right ones set up. So make sure that you're installing the ones that you actually need. So for Google Cardboard, you're going to be developing for your phone, which you'll then plug into a cardboard. And I would suggest just go ahead and installing Android and iOS. If you don't have access to an Android device, we have a couple that you should be able to check out and use. Those are far easier to develop for than iOS, simply because I'm pretty sure you have to have like an Apple developer license or something like that to install things on your iPhone. So at the very least, install Android and iOS if you know how to do that. And then later, when we're developing things for the Oculus, you'll need to use whatever desktop operating system you have available. So Windows if you're on Windows, Linux, Mac, etc. And a quick preview of Unity terminology. The first thing to know is an asset. This is basically anything that you can imagine going into a Unity project. So audio clips, 3D models, textures, anything that you can kind of think of as being related to a Unity project. And then projects and scenes. So a Unity project is actually basically just a folder on your computer, and it groups together everything related to one specific virtual environment that you're working on. So it's basically just a collection of resources. And then what makes that into an actual virtual environment or defines the actual virtual environment are the scenes that you create within that project. So these are the things where you actually kind of go in and see a virtual environment. So you can imagine this would be a scene within a project stored in a folder on your computer. And then scripts, this is related to the mono-developed script editor that I was talking about earlier. These are just different things. I'll explain game objects first because I think that makes a little more sense. So you have your project, which is basically a folder, and within that folder you have your resources. These are all the assets related to your project. Again, those things like MP3 files, 3D models, and so on. But once you start adding an asset to a scene, it then becomes a game object, which is a little bit more specific to Unity because it adds additional functionality. So imagine that I have this 3D model of a bear as an asset in my project. Once I actually drag that into the actual scene, it becomes a game object. I can move it around within the scene. That's a new feature from adding it to the scene that's unique to game objects over assets. And once it becomes a game object, I can also add scripts to it. So I can write code to make it move up every 5 seconds or turn around every 30 seconds. So I can add custom behavior to this game object using scripts that I add to it. And these are more examples of game objects in scenes. So we have actual 3D models like the bear and this tree. We also have lighting and sound objects. So there's a wide variety of game objects, just like there's a wide variety of assets. But the thing to remember about game objects is that when you add an asset to a scene, it becomes a game object, and it opens up a lot of different functionality that you can change and add to your game object. So this is an example of a Unity window. I just want to go through a couple of the tabs. So up here is the main place where you'll be doing your editing. This is the scene view. So you can drag assets, which become game objects here. So you can see, a preview of what your virtual environment actually looks like. So you can see we have a wall game object, a floor game object, this game object that's called a particle system. You can see that we can move this around, and then that will show you what your scene actually looks like. But to preview what it looks like when your virtual environment is actually running, you can go down here to the Game tab. When you don't have this play button pressed, it's just a static view of whatever is in the scene view, whatever the camera sees at that current position it's in. But once you press play, you can go into the game view and interact with your virtual environment like you would when your program is actually running. So again, when this isn't pressed, you just get a static view of whatever place the camera is in, the camera game object. Whatever place the main camera game object is in, that's what you're going to see static in the game window, and then press play, you can actually interact with it. An important thing to note about this play button, if you're in game, if you're in the live game mode, you've pressed play, you're interacting with your game, you can still make changes to game objects. So you can move, for example, if I wanted to move this particle system up, I could do that while my game, while I'm like in live game mode. But because I'm in live game mode, none of the changes will be there once I leave live game mode. So once I press play again and it's off. So make sure that if you're in game, the live game mode, and you're making edits, to either decide not to make them then, or remember them so you can make all those changes again once you get back to your regular scene. So then there's the hierarchy. This is a list of all the game objects that are in this given Unity scene. And you can go through and click on them and highlight them, which will in turn change the Inspector tab. So the Inspector tab shows you all of the features or all of the details of whatever game object you have highlighted over here or here. So since we have this particle system highlighted here, you'll see all of the details or options related to that game object. So you can change the name, you can move it around. This is also where you can add scripts to this particular game object. So you can do that by clicking on this gear icon here. And then the last tab is the project tab. This is just a preview of all the resources or the assets that you have in your project, your Unity project. So again, remember that Unity project is basically like a folder. This is allowing you to it's working basically as a file explorer, so you can see everything related to this particular project and drag an asset here to pull it into your scene and make it a game object. A couple of Unity resources that you may want to know. So of course you'll need assets to actually make your scenes. Unity has an asset store where you can search for free assets. So again, if you need characters, buildings, lights, sounds, basically anything to put into your scene, you can find that here. You can also find a lot of 3D models on Google SketchUp. And I can provide more information about importing assets if you're having trouble, but basically if you add it to your game folder or drag it in, or to your project folder, sorry. If you add it to your project folder, that's pretty much how you import it. And then of course we have recommended Unity tutorials on the class website. A couple more definitions to know that will be helpful. So you definitely, you're working with raycasting in assignment 1, you'll definitely need to understand how colliders work. And colliders you can think of as basically a bubble around a game object. So when you're working in a virtual environment and you want to define where the ground is, for example, or a wall, you need to set up that there is something there that prevents your first-person controller from going through that wall, because to Unity, that's just a model. It doesn't necessarily have any physics associated with it. So you can add a collider to the wall to prevent, as an example, your first-person controller from walking through it. So this is an example of a collider attached to a chair. So you can make it very rough, kind of bubble around the chair, or you can make it more defined. And apart from preventing characters from walking through walls, this is also useful in for other things. So again, for raycasting for your first assignment, you can set up colliders around things so that when you look at something and the ray that's being cast from the first-person camera collides with that collider, you can have some effect happen. And then particles are just kind of cool because they can make your virtual environment a lot more exciting and add sometimes some realism. Or my favorite example of explaining a particle is kind of what you would expect to happen if you're casting if you have a magic wand. You have kind of things emitting from it and bubbling out, but these can also be used for sort of fire effects or different things like that. And the last thing, materials, shaders, and textures. So all of your 3D models will have materials associated with them. This defines kind of how they look in the virtual environment. But if depending on where you get your 3D models, or if you're using the Unity standard assets, they may have materials that look like this, that are kind of default white looking materials. And you can go in and change these with shaders and textures. So the texture is what would actually make this look different. So I could add, you could imagine adding like a grass texture here, and then applying this material to my floor or ground in my virtual environment. And then you can change how this texture is applied to this material using a shader. So you can go into more details. There's a lot that goes into understanding, like creating custom shaders and building these sort of things up. But you should know specifically, that a game object has a material, and then you can change what that material actually looks like with the texture. I'm skipping over this. There's a lot of information online related to setting up animations in Unity. This I just want to get you, in this video I just want to get you started. So I'm going to skip through most of this. We can talk about it later if you have specific questions. I'm also skipping through this. Dr. Locke will talk about the history of VR in class. Developing for VR in Unity is pretty easy, especially if you're doing the Oculus. It's just setting up a couple of options. Make sure that you have Oculus support set up for your computer itself. I think this link may be out of date. I'll need to double check, but make sure that you go to the Oculus website and download whatever is relevant for your specific operating system. Then when you're actually developing for Oculus, for virtual reality in Oculus, setting that up is really easy in Unity. You just go to Project Settings and Player, and you check virtual reality supported, and that's basically it. You can plug in the Oculus Rift while you have Unity up and actually test it in the headset. It's not listed here, but Cardboard can be a little more involved from a Unity standpoint. They have a lot of things set up, and a lot of people have spent time developing tutorials for setting up Google Cardboard in Unity. Basically, from what I remember, you need to use a special first-person controller that has a lot of Cardboard scripts attached to it. So that will basically set up everything you need to do for the camera for Cardboard. And then once you've done all that, you don't need to worry about checking that virtual reality supported for the Cardboard builds. Just make sure you're using the Cardboard scripts for Unity, and then basically build a normal Android or iOS application. So these are more resources. Oh, and I'll provide some links to Google Cardboard setup and everything like that on the course website. But I think that concludes that for this video. Please let me know if this is helpful, and if you would like to continue having these sorts of things made available apart from just going through tutorials that we share out. If you found this video helpful, just let us know. and if you have any requests for special topics. Thanks.